this phrase, coming out of the fog. Who's heard this phrase?
Where's the fog machine?
Dee Dee, did you bring the fog machine? She was supposed to bring the fog machine, so we were doing it at that point, but okay. So I'll try to illustrate. So what does it mean? Because people ask me, what does it mean? What does the fog mean? I think the best place to start is thinking about what is a fog. When you're in a fog, you can't really see what's ahead of you. You can't really see what's behind you, but you do know that something is there. It's kind of scary to think about what's there, but since you can't really see it, it feels a little bit peaceful in a fog. It can feel a little bit like a place you might want to just sit down and have a cup of tea and hang out, and it's kind of quiet in there and nice. So it's both kind of a scary place, but it's also protective. Some people talk about the general idea of coming out of the fog. Well, I talk about this, of coming into a deeper, more complex understanding of the losses that we've endured as adoptees. And there's many of them. The loss of our first experience of trust, the loss of anyone who looks like us, any biological, genetic mirroring, the loss of knowing our ancestors or a genetic history or a medical history, the loss of a healthier stress response system due to our early trauma, the loss of, I really could go on and on, really. But I think that coming out of the fog is kind of understanding those losses on a deeper level and kind of knowing about the hypervigilance that we all have as adoptees. I always say this, I've never met a chill adoptee. I've never met, and she always says she is, but yesterday she made dinner and she was freaking out. She didn't get everything perfect, so. And then last night, before we went to bed, I was sleeping in our guest room and she said, if you're lonely in the middle of the night, you can come get me. And I was like, you're adopted! But the fog also is fear, obligation, and guilt. These kind of experiences that adoptees often endure throughout their life. For me, coming out of the fog was all of those things, and I'm still coming out, and sometimes I go back in, but it also was getting in touch with this really deep ingrained knowing in my body of almost like terror that's always there with me. It's a grieving for the 1-week-old version of me that was screaming, crying for my mother, crying for her smell, for her sound, for her heartbeat, and never could find her again. And it's always right here, and it's always right here. And I feel like eventually learning how that's impacted everything. I'm scared all the time. I have learned to ease that throughout the years in many different forms and ways. Right now it's the ocean. It's not vodka anymore. The alcoholics in the back. Yeah, but it's like being that on edge, waiting for colossal loss, knowing on a deeper level that loss could happen in a second. Just that is in my heart, and just trying to live with that in my heart. It's also kind of like cool because it's like, all right, colossal loss can happen in a second, so dive into life. I mean, I don't know, that's kind of like another way to look at it. Several years ago, I wrote my whole story as much as I came to know it, and my friends were there with me while I became a detective, and I became a writer, and I unraveled mysteries, and I stalked people on Facebook and did all the things, and I learned, part of the story that I wasn't so much relinquished as I was taken from my mother, which isn't that rare of a story. And they saw me go through the process of sadness, anger, rage, transformation, longing, shame, all those things. And I think my feelings, but them being able to me read a chapter and look at my friend Trish back there and her eyes are filled up with tears, and all of a sudden I can feel it. I can feel my feelings because it's my life story is being witnessed. Sounds codependent, it might be, but whatever. It's my story. And feelings have been hard for me. My therapist will tell you my main defense mechanism is intellectualization. I sit down, I dissect the entire situation, and then I leave. And so it's, the really feel it, because I had people walking beside me in the fog. That really helped me move around some of that grief. And it really helped me be able to you can't heal it if you can't feel it, but it's true. I'm not healed, but at least I'm not so scared to feel anymore. And I know that once I feel, I'm actually going to feel better. So the developers of the 2023 adoptee consciousness model asked the questions, how do we support someone when they're in the fog? How do we support someone if they're stepping out in and out of the fog? Or what if they never come out? And can someone go back in? They created this model. If you haven't heard of it, you should look it up online. It's more of a, why is online funny?
I don't know.
It's more of a spiral. It's not like a linear, it's more of like touch points. Highly suggest finding it when you leave tonight. Check it out. But before in order to be adoptee trauma-informed clinicians, we really need to understand this problem of disenfranchised grief. And if you don't know what that is, it's the kind of grief where people want you to not have it. It happened a lot, like in the 80s when people were dying of HIV. That was disenfranchised grief. People weren't really allowed to talk about the sadness of the people dying of HIV. So to illustrate a little bit of disenfranchised grief, I'm going to jump ahead and guess a question or a comment that might happen at the end of this night tonight, because it happens every time. It happened in Brattleboro at the documentary showing a few weekends ago of Reckoning of the Primal Wound. And the question always is a version of this. Isn't it better to have been adopted than for the person to have been raised in an orphanage or in squalor or on the streets? And that question is a grief suppressor. That question is like, just put a lid on, the grief. And I get it, like there's, it is a thing you can ponder. It's a realistic thing to ponder, but it's usually asked after adoptees share a part of their story that is not a happy ending. Then the question's asked. And, it really, I feel like suppressed grief is a huge contributor to so many of the severe mental illnesses we see with adoptees today. So I'd like to do a little, and the other thing I want to say is the love and gratitude that we have or don't have for our adopted families it's a separate issue from this experience of loss. So they're just apples and oranges. So I just want to address that before I get the Post-it note. And I'd love to do a little call and repeat right now if you guys are down. Is that cool? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you repeat after me. I've never done this. It's normal to want to know where I came from.
It's normal to want to know where I came from.
It's normal to want to know who came before me.
It's normal to want to know who came before me.
It's normal to have complex feelings about all of my losses.
It's normal to have complex feelings about all of my losses.
All right, cool. So another question arises.
Elsie's pretty cool.
Elsie's
I was gonna do that for you, but then I was like, you know what?
Making sure everyone got it. That would be fun in the sad.
I know, I get it. Gotta lift it. Don't be too sad.
Gotta
Lift that
lift
back
it.
up.
Gotta
Don't
lift
get too
it up.
sad. Gotta lift it up. So another question is, why would we come out of the fog? Why would we be surrounded by a more complex pain? That doesn't sound fun. Why would we want to do that? And another question arises for me of, who here wants to live a authentic and heartfelt life? Let's do a raise of hands. Not everyone. You might be lying. Most people, you do. All right, she does twice. She does twice. Do you? Okay. You can't do that unless you allow for grief. You cannot lead an authentic, heartfelt life unless you let yourself have the feelings, the grief, the anxiety, the rage. Those feelings won't last forever. They'll come and go, but you can't have a deeper sense of intimacy with relationships. You can't have self-knowledge. You can't have curiosity about the world. If you're just living in this fog, you'll be barely living, you know? So that's why, I think. I feel like for me, becoming okay with being uncomfortable has been a huge part of my healing. Hence the jumping in the ocean. It's really amazing. But I really had to look at the foundation that I came from to know how to work with the materials in order for me to do all the things I want to do in my life, which is a lot of things. So it's not just adoptees coming out of the fog. It is our friends and our family and our parents and our birth parents and our therapists. And if I have to give a word of advice for anyone who loves an adoptee, especially people who are considering adopting, you cannot fix or cure the grief. You cannot make it good enough so that the grief won't be there. And if you try to do that, the adoptee is going to know, and they're going to feel pressure to make you feel okay, because we are master people pleasers. And the other side of the coin of people pleasing is rage and resentment. So it's just not going to work. So what can you do? You can make room for the grief. You can listen to adult adoptees. You can acknowledge the racism your transracial adoptee is experiencing. You can acknowledge color. You can invite conversations over and over again. Don't push. They might never talk to you about it, but invite the conversation. You can recognize that the search for biological family is normal and should be not encouraged, but discussed, an open invitation to discuss. I have met some really wonderful adoptive parents in my years being a therapist. If they didn't get it before, they get it now, and it is really heartwarming to see that. Some of them are pretty angry about the lack of education that they got in the beginning, about, you know, the amount of impact that separation, especially if it's right away. I mean, there's always impact, but you know, there's that old myth of like, if you take a baby immediately, it's like less, and actually that is not the case. There's a whole different kind of trauma that comes with that. But people didn't know, but things are changing a bit. I just want to end by saying, about a few weeks ago, I had an adoptive mom say to me that she often and very early with her 2 adopted kids would tell them, there will always be a big place for grief in this house. And I just thought that was really beautiful, and that's the work. So with that, let's get excited for our 12 brave speakers. We're gonna have an intermission, but thank you for coming. Oh, it's me.
It's you?
Yeah.